Water is the very essence of life. It sustains human existence, fuels agriculture, and powers industry across the globe. For nations, access to adequate water resources is not merely an economic concern, it is a fundamental pillar of national security and public well-being. In regions marked by aridity and burgeoning populations, the quest for water can define destinies and shape geopolitical landscapes. It is more than just a commodity to be traded or managed. It is the lifeblood of civilizations, a silent witness to their rise and fall. The fight for water is often a fight for survival itself, a reality that many communities understand intimately. The Indus River system, with its vast network of tributaries, serves as a critical shared artery for both India and Pakistan. Originating in the Himalayas, these mighty rivers carve their way through rugged terrains before nourishing the plains where millions reside. For countless communities in this historically water-scarce part of the world, the Indus and its waters are not an abstract concept but a daily reality, a source of sustenance and a foundation for their livelihoods. Agriculture, the backbone of both economies, is overwhelmingly dependent on this river system, making its equitable and uninterrupted flow a matter of profound significance for regional stability and food security. However, when shared water resources are intertwined with deep-seated political mistrust and historical animosity, they can swiftly transform from lifelines into dangerous fault lines. This is particularly true in zones like the Indian subcontinent, where territorial disputes and cross-border conflicts have been a recurring feature for decades. The waters that bind geographically can, in such contexts, become instruments of leverage or sources of contention. What should be a symbol of shared heritage and mutual dependence can instead become a focal point for strategic rivalry, with every drop counted and contested, further embittering already strained relations between neighboring states. The Indus Waters Treaty, signed in 1960, was conceived as a mechanism to prevent such hydro-conflict, a diplomatic bridge over these troubled waters. For many years it stood as a rare example of cooperation between two otherwise adversarial nations. Yet recent events, particularly the horrific terror attack in Pahalgam in April 2025, and India's subsequent actions, have shaken the very foundations of this long-standing agreement. A crisis has unfolded, threatening to unravel decades of carefully managed water sharing and potentially redrawing the lines of conflict in South Asia, with water itself at the volatile center. The Indus Waters Treaty, or IWT, came into being on September 19, 1960, a product of nearly a decade of painstaking negotiations. It was signed by then Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and Pakistani President Ayub Khan, with the crucial mediation of Eugene Black, the then president of the World Bank. Given the backdrop of the First Kashmir War and the persistent acrimony between the two newly independent nations, the treaty was hailed as a landmark achievement in international diplomacy. It sought to provide a framework for the utilization of the waters of the Indus system, thereby averting potential disputes that could escalate into wider conflicts. The core of the treaty lay in its division of the 6 major rivers of the Indus basin. India was granted unrestricted use of the waters of the 3 eastern rivers, the Sutlej, the Beas, and the Ravi. Conversely, Pakistan was allocated the waters of the 3 western rivers, the Indus, the Jhelum, and the Chenab. While Pakistan received the lion's share of the total water volume, India was permitted certain uses on the western rivers for domestic purposes, agriculture, and hydroelectric projects, subject to specific design and operational criteria outlined in the treaty. This division aimed to give each country a measure of certainty over its water supplies. For over 6 decades, the Indus Waters Treaty demonstrated remarkable resilience. It survived the full-scale wars between India and Pakistan in 1965 and 1971, the Kargil conflict of 1999, and numerous other periods of intense military standoff and diplomatic breakdown, including the Parliament attack crisis and the Mumbai terror attacks. This endurance underscored its perceived importance to both nations, functioning as a vital channel of communication and cooperation, even when all other ties were severed. It was often cited as a successful example of conflict resolution, a testament to pragmatic statesmanship. However, a critical aspect of the IWT, now under intense scrutiny, is the absence of any clause for unilateral suspension or termination. The treaty provides mechanisms for consultation, inspection, and dispute resolution. India's recent decision to suspend its participation ventures into uncharted legal territory. This move is unprecedented in the treaty's history and raises profound questions about its future viability, signaling a potential paradigm shift in how such agreements are viewed. The picturesque valley of Pahalgam, nestled in the mountains of Indian-administered Kashmir, and renowned for its serene beauty, and as a base for pilgrims, became a scene of unspeakable horror in April 2025. A meticulously planned and executed terror attack shattered the tranquility of this popular tourist destination. Assailants opened fire indiscriminately, targeting innocent civilians who had come to seek respite and enjoy the region's natural splendor. The suddenness and brutality of the assault left a trail of devastation, turning a haven of peace into a landscape of fear and mourning almost instantaneously. The human cost of the Pahalgam attack was staggering and deeply tragic. Official reports confirmed that at least 26 tourists, hailing from various parts of India and some from abroad, lost their lives in the carnage. Many more sustained serious injuries, their holiday dreams cruelly transformed into nightmares. The scale of the attack, one of the deadliest targeting civilians in Kashmir in recent years, sent profound shockwaves not just across India but also resonated with the international community, which broadly condemned the barbaric act. The identities of the victims, everyday people seeking leisure, underscored the callousness of the perpetrators. India's response was swift and accusatory. Even as rescue and relief operations were underway, New Delhi pointed a firm finger at Pakistan-based terrorist organizations, alleging their direct involvement in orchestrating and carrying out the attack. Indian intelligence agencies claimed to possess credible evidence linking the perpetrators to known militant groups operating with impunity from Pakistani soil. The Indian government further implied that such audacious attacks could not occur without at least the tacit support or deliberate negligence of elements within the Pakistani state apparatus, a charge Pakistan vehemently denied as always. The Pahalgam massacre ignited a maelstrom of public grief, outrage and calls for retribution across India. Citizens, aghast at the senseless slaughter, demanded that the government take decisive and impactful action, something that went beyond the usual diplomatic protests or dossiers handed over. There was a palpable sense of frustration with perceived inaction against persistent cross-border terrorism. The political leadership in New Delhi found itself under immense domestic pressure to deliver a strong, visible response that would serve as a deterrent and assuage national anger, setting the stage for an unprecedented step. In a move that reverberated across the region and the globe, the Indian government announced in April 2025 its decision to suspend its participation in the six-decade-old Indus Waters Treaty. This was not a threat, as had been mooted in the past, but a formal declaration of a shift in policy. It marked a significant departure from India's traditional approach of insulating the IWT from the broader political conflicts with Pakistan. The decision signaled that New Delhi was now prepared to use all available levers of influence, including shared natural resources, in its response to perceived state-sponsored terrorism emanating from across the border. The Indian government explicitly and unequivocally linked this drastic measure to the Pahalgam terror attack. The official narrative, articulated by senior ministers and diplomats, was that Pakistan's continued failure to take credible and irreversible action against terrorist groups operating from its territory had forced India's hand. The phrase "blood and water cannot flow together" gained currency, encapsulating the sentiment that India could no longer be expected to uphold cooperative agreements while its citizens were being targeted by violence originating from Pakistan. The suspension was presented as a painful but necessary consequence of Pakistan's alleged policies. India's stated rationale was that the suspension of IWT participation was intended to exert significant pressure on Pakistan to dismantle its terror infrastructure. New Delhi argued that if Pakistan felt the tangible impact on a resource as vital as water, it might be compelled to reassess its strategic calculus regarding the use of militant proxies. The move was framed not as an act of aggression, but as a countermeasure designed to protect India's national security interests and compel a change in Pakistan's behavior. It was a clear message that the old rules of engagement were no longer applicable in the face of persistent hostility. the underlying message from India was stark and uncompromising. The onus for the restoration of normalcy in treaty relations, and indeed in bilateral ties, lay squarely with Pakistan. If Pakistan could not, or would not, guarantee an end to cross-border terrorism that threatened Indian lives, then India felt no moral or legal obligation to ensure the uninterrupted operation of the water-sharing treaties framework. This was a high-stakes gambit, indicating that India was willing to escalate matters significantly to achieve its counter-terrorism objectives, effectively putting the long-standing treaty on notice and challenging the status quo. From New Delhi's vantage point, India's dramatic decision to suspend its participation in the Indus Waters Treaty was presented as an inevitable outcome of Islamabad's alleged skewed national priorities. The core question posed by Indian policymakers and amplified by its media was stark. Does the Pakistani establishment place a higher value on nurturing and sheltering United Nations-designated terrorist groups for its strategic ends? Or does it prioritize the fundamental well-being of its own vast population? India asserted that Pakistan's actions, or lack thereof, against terror groups provided a damning answer to this critical question. Indian officials have consistently maintained and reiterated with force after the Pahalgam attack that elements within Pakistan's powerful military and intelligence agencies seem more invested in supporting or at best, tolerating militant proxies than in ensuring the welfare of Pakistan's 240 million citizens. These citizens, particularly in the agrarian heartlands of Punjab and Sindh, are heavily dependent on the waters of the Indus system for their livelihoods and survival. India's argument is that this alleged prioritization of asymmetric warfare over human development is not only a threat to India, but also detrimental to Pakistan itself. The narrative advanced by India is that if the Pakistani leadership genuinely cared about the potential water crisis and agricultural devastation that a disruption to the Indus Waters Treaty could unleash upon its populace, it would have taken demonstrable, verifiable, and irreversible steps to dismantle terror networks operating from its soil long ago. The continued existence of these groups and their ability to launch attacks like the one in Pahalgam is presented by India as evidence of Pakistan's insincerity or incapacity to act decisively. This perceived inaction, India contends, has now forced New Delhi to take drastic measures to safeguard its interests. By targeting the Indus Waters Treaty, a pact previously considered sacrosanct, India aims to precipitate a moment of reckoning within Pakistan. The intention, as articulated by Indian strategic thinkers, is to force a difficult and unavoidable choice upon Pakistan's ruling elite: either comprehensively address India's long-standing and grave security concerns regarding cross-border terrorism, or face increasingly severe consequences on resources absolutely vital for Pakistan's own economic stability and societal cohesion. The move seeks to highlight the profound costs of Pakistan's alleged policies to its own people and to the international community. While the announcement of suspending Indus Waters Treaty participation ignited fervent discussion and, in some quarters in India, a degree of triumphalism about potentially turning off the taps to Pakistan, the practical ground reality of choking water supplies is far more intricate and challenging. The notion that India can immediately halt or significantly reduce the flow of the western rivers, Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, to Pakistan is, according to most water resource experts and engineers, an oversimplification of a complex hydrological and infrastructural situation. Public sentiment, honestly, often outpaces technical feasibility in such matters. Experts consistently point to substantial logistical, topographical, and most importantly, infrastructural hurdles. The Indus River system is one of the largest in the world, and its geography, particularly the mountainous terrain where the western rivers predominantly flow before entering Pakistan, does not lend itself to easy, large-scale diversion or blockage by India overnight. Unlike smaller, more manageable river systems, manipulating the flow of these mighty rivers requires colossal engineering efforts and specific topographical advantages which are not uniformly available across the entire stretch controlled by India. Crucially, India currently lacks the massive, ready-to-use water storage and diversion infrastructure, such as large-scale dams and extensive canal networks specifically designed for this purpose on the western rivers, that would be necessary to fully withhold or redirect the quantum of water allocated to Pakistan under the Indus Waters Treaty. While India is permitted to build run-of-river projects and has some existing storage on these rivers, these are not designed to impound the entirety of the flow. Constructing new infrastructure capable of significantly impacting Pakistan's share would take many years, if not decades, and would require enormous financial investment and overcome ecological challenges. Therefore, while India's suspension of its participation in the treaty is undoubtedly a powerful political statement and a significant diplomatic escalation, its immediate, tangible impact on the actual volume of water flowing into Pakistan is likely to be limited in the short to medium term. India can, and has stated its intent to, expedite projects to fully utilize its own entitlements under the Indus Waters Treaty on both eastern and western rivers, which it argues it has not fully done. However, weaponizing the water beyond this, to create acute scarcity in Pakistan, is a far more protracted and uncertain endeavor. The suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty by India sent shockwaves through Pakistan. News headlines blared warnings and angry crowds took to the streets, with political leaders threatening dire consequences, even war. But in New Delhi, the government stood firm. Indian officials, led by Prime Minister Modi, made it clear that national security would never be compromised, no matter the pressure. In a televised address, Prime Minister Modi declared, "Terror and talk cannot go together. Water and blood cannot flow together." These words echoed across the nation and the world. India's message was unambiguous. Dialogue and cooperation would only resume when Pakistan took credible, irreversible action to dismantle its terror networks. For India, water is a resource for peace and development, not a bargaining chip for those who shelter terrorism. The government vowed never to allow water to be used as leverage by hostile actors. India called on the region to choose responsibility and peace, but issued a firm warning: national security is non-negotiable. The world saw a nation resolute in its pursuit of stability, yet unwavering in its defense. In April 2025, the Indian government made a decisive move to safeguard the nation's future. Responding to repeated provocations and threats to its people, India announced the suspension of its participation in the Indus Waters Treaty. This bold step was a measured, strategic response to ensure the security and prosperity of Indian citizens. India's leadership demonstrated resolve and responsibility, acting only after years of patience and restraint. The government's decision was rooted in a commitment to peace, but also in the necessity to protect Indian lives from ongoing threats. By prioritizing the well-being of its people, India set a powerful example of responsible governance in the region. India's actions were not impulsive but a necessary response to persistent cross-border challenges. The government's resolve was clear. India would no longer allow its goodwill to be taken for granted. India's strategic patience had been tested time and again, but its commitment to regional stability remained unwavering. The world took note of India's responsible and measured approach, recognizing its right to defend its interests. India's focus remained on progress, strengthening its water management, empowering communities, and building a secure future. The suspension of the treaty was a message of strength, not hostility, a call for accountability and peace. India's vision is clear: a secure, prosperous nation that leads by example and upholds its responsibilities. Through decisive action, India reaffirmed its role as a responsible regional power, committed to peace and development. The path ahead may be challenging, but India's resolve and unity will continue to inspire progress and stability. India's leadership stands as a beacon for others, showing that strength and responsibility can go hand in hand. The nation moves forward, confident in its choices and united in its pursuit of peace, security, and prosperity for all. As India continues to lead with vision and resolve, the world watches a nation determined to secure a brighter future.